Hey everyone! Hope you're doing well today. Have you ever felt like life completely turned its back on you? Like the people you trusted the most, your own family, were the ones to hurt you the most? Well, today's story is one of betrayal, survival, and karma that will have you on the edge of your seat. Imagine being kicked out by the people who were supposed to love you the most. No warning, no second chances. How would you feel? And what if, years later, they came crawling back, hoping for your help? This is a story about someone who was thrown away, only to rise up stronger than ever. Let's dive in. From the outside, my family looked perfect. A beautiful house, happy smiles and photos, and the kind of warmth that made people envy us. But behind closed doors, things weren't as picture-perfect as they seemed. My parents had 2 children, me, their eldest, and my younger sibling, the one they doted on like royalty. I was never a troublemaker. I followed the rules, helped around the house, and did everything to make them proud. My grades were good, I never missed curfew, and I always put my family first. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. My younger sibling, on the other hand, could do no wrong. If they broke a vase, it was just an accident. If I forgot to do the dishes, it was irresponsible. The double standards were clear, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself that love wasn't measured in comparisons. But deep down, I noticed the difference. The way my parents' eyes softened when they spoke to my sibling but stayed cold when it came to me. The way my achievements were brushed aside while the smallest of their successes were celebrated. Birthdays, gifts, attention, it was always them first. Still, I never complained. I just wanted to be accepted, to belong. Then one day, everything changed. It started with a missing envelope of money. It wasn't a small amount, enough to cause tension in any household. My father had kept it on the kitchen counter, and when he went back to get it, it was gone. Accusations flew, and my heart pounded as my mother's gaze landed on me. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice sharp. I was confused. "What?" "The money," my father snapped. "Don't play dumb." I looked between them, trying to process. "I didn't take anything." My sibling stood in the corner, silent, eyes wide with fake innocence. My stomach turned. Could they have taken it? No, they wouldn't, would they? "I swear, I didn't touch it," I pleaded, my voice shaking. But my words meant nothing. It was as if they had already made up their minds. My mother shook her head in disappointment, my father clenched his fists, and my sibling? They just stood there, watching, waiting. I felt the shift at that moment, the final crack in the illusion of family. The love I had been holding onto for years, the belief that deep down, my parents cared for me, shattered. I was no longer their child. I was just a thief in their eyes. I stood there frozen, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. My father's eyes were filled with anger, my mother's with disappointment. I kept repeating the same words, "I didn't take it. I swear." But they weren't listening. They didn't even hesitate before believing the worst about me. My younger sibling, standing in the corner, finally spoke. "I saw them near the counter earlier," they said, voice small, calculated. My heart sank. I turned to them, disbelief washing over me. "That's not true." My voice cracked, a mixture of shock and desperation. My father's face twisted in disgust. "So now you're calling your sibling a liar?" His voice was like ice. I looked at my mother, silently begging for her to defend me, to at least consider the possibility that I wasn't lying. But she just sighed, shaking her head like she was tired of me. "We've given you everything," she muttered. "And this is how you repay us?" I felt my knees weaken. "Everything?" I wanted to scream. I had spent my whole life trying to be enough for them. I had followed their rules, done everything right. But none of it mattered now. I didn't take anything. I shouted, my voice raw with frustration. Then where's the money? My father shot back. I had no answer. I didn't know. But the truth didn't matter anymore. My father turned away, his jaw clenched. I won't have a thief living under my roof. I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He meant it. My mother didn't argue. She didn't fight for me. She just walked to my room, came back with a small bag, one I recognized as the one I took to school trips. She tossed it at my feet. Take your things and go. The words knocked the air out of my lungs. I turned to my sibling, searching for any sign of guilt, of regret. There was none. They just stood there, biting back a smirk, eyes full of victory. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I swallowed the lump in my throat, bent down, and picked up the bag. My hands were shaking, but I didn't say another word. I walked to the door, feeling every memory, every bit of love I had for this house, this family, crumble into dust. I paused for a second, hoping, praying, that my mother would stop me, that my father would come to his senses. But they didn't. I stepped outside. The door slammed behind me. And just like that, I was alone. The cold air bit at my skin as I stepped onto the empty street. My hands clutched the small bag they had thrown at me, the only thing I had left. I turned back once, staring at the house I had called home for years. The lights inside were still on, shadows moving behind the curtains. They had already moved on. I took a deep breath and walked away. I wandered aimlessly for hours, the weight of what had just happened crushing me. I had nowhere to go. I had always believed that, no matter how bad things got, my family would be my safe place. But now, I was nothing to them. By the time morning came, my body ached from exhaustion, and hunger clawed at my stomach. I reached into my pocket, hoping for at least a few dollars, but I had nothing. My parents had thrown me out without even a single cent. I tried calling a few friends, my hands trembling as I tapped on my phone screen. Each ring felt like an eternity, each voicemail a fresh wound. When someone finally picked up, my voice cracked. Hey. I need a place to stay. Just for a few days. A long pause. Then a sigh. I don't think that's a good idea. I gripped the phone tighter. Please. I won't be a bother. My parents wouldn't be okay with it. Another call. Another excuse. I wish I could help, but I'm really busy right now. Maybe try asking someone else? Each rejection cut deeper than the last. People I had spent years laughing with, trusting, disappeared the moment I needed them. I spent the first night on a park bench, pulling my thin jacket around me for warmth. I didn't sleep. The streets were loud, the night filled with the sound of distant sirens, voices, and footsteps that made my heart race. Every rustling leaf made me paranoid, every shadow felt like a threat. By the second day, my hunger was unbearable. I walked past a small cafe, the scent of fresh bread making my stomach twist painfully. My legs felt weak, my head dizzy. I had never gone without food before. I had never known what true hunger felt like. Desperation pushed me forward. I swallowed my pride and asked the store owner if they had any leftover food. They barely looked at me before shaking their head. We're not a charity. Humiliation burned through me, but I kept moving. At a gas station, I saw a sign in the window, "Help wanted, part-time cleaner." I stepped inside, my voice barely above a whisper as I asked the manager if the job was still available. He eyed me, taking in my tired face, my wrinkled clothes. Ever worked a cleaning job before? I shook my head. You willing to work hard? I nodded. I can pay minimum wage. 3 shifts a week. That's all I got. It wasn't much, but it was something. I accepted without hesitation. The work was exhausting. I spent hours mopping floors, wiping down shelves, cleaning public restrooms that made me gag. My body ached, my hands cracked from the chemicals, but I pushed through. Every dollar I earned meant I could eat, even if it was just a small meal a day. But surviving wasn't the same as living. Nights were the hardest. I rented a tiny bed in a rundown hostel, but it wasn't home. I had no one to talk to, no one to share my pain with. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my parents even thought about me. Days turned into weeks. The pain of betrayal never faded, but something inside me hardened. I had lost everything. But I refused to lose myself. The days blurred together, each one a battle to survive. I worked every shift I could get, cleaning bathrooms, stocking shelves, and sweeping floors until my arms ached. Every night, I counted my money, stretching every dollar just to afford a meal. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep going. Still, the loneliness was suffocating. The world had moved on without me. My parents, my sibling, the friends who had abandoned me, none of them cared where I was. Some nights, I told myself I didn't care either. But deep down, the betrayal still burned. One evening, after another long shift, I sat outside the gas station, too exhausted to walk back to the dingy hostel I was staying in. That's when I met him. An older man, probably in his 50s, stepped out of a sleek black car and walked toward the store. He was well-dressed, confident, the kind of person I had always imagined being one day. As he passed me, he stopped, eyeing my uniform and tired face. "You work here?" he asked. I nodded, too drained to make conversation. He studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You look like someone who's capable of more than just this." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah? Life doesn't seem to think so." He didn't smile. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Come to this address tomorrow. I have a job opening. Something better than mopping floors." I stared at the card, my fingers hesitant to take it. "Why are you helping me?" His expression softened. "Because someone once helped me when I was at my lowest. Now, I do the same." The next morning, I stood outside the address on the card, a sleek office building downtown. I almost didn't go in. A part of me whispered that it was too good to be true. But another part, the part that refused to stay in the gutter, told me to take the chance. Inside, the man was waiting. His name was Mr. Carter, and he owned a small but growing business. He didn't promise miracles, but he gave me something just as valuable, an opportunity. "You start at the bottom," he said. "If you prove yourself, you'll climb. That's up to you." And so, I started again. The work was different but just as hard. I ran errands, took notes, stayed late to learn whatever I could. I had no experience, but I absorbed everything like a sponge. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. I moved out of the hostel, renting a small apartment. I took courses, learned business strategies, and slowly climbed the corporate ladder. Promotions came, raises followed. Soon, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I built my own success, brick by brick, until I no longer recognized the broken person who had once slept on a park bench. But despite everything, I never forgot. Not the betrayal. Not the night I was thrown out. Not the fact that the people who should have loved me the most had turned their backs without hesitation. And I knew, one day, they would regret it. It started with a simple message. A number I didn't recognize flashed on my screen, but something about it felt familiar. I hesitated before opening it. "We need to talk. Please." There was no name, no explanation, but I knew. It was them. I let the message sit for hours before replying. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th Street. Tomorrow at noon." I didn't tell them who I had become. I didn't let them know that the struggling, broken person they had kicked out was gone. I wanted to see them exactly as they were, desperate, powerless, and at my mercy. The next day, I arrived early. I sat in a quiet corner, watching the door. When they walked in, I almost didn't recognize them. My father, once so proud and confident, looked tired and defeated. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoulders slumped. My mother's usual polished appearance was gone, replaced with dark circles and worry lines. They were a shadow of the people who had once thrown me away without hesitation. They didn't recognize me at first. I had changed. The years had hardened me, success had refined me. They scanned the cafe, looking for someone lost and struggling. Someone they could guilt into helping them. I let them wait. Let them feel helpless. Then, finally, I stood and walked toward them. Their eyes widened in shock. "You," my mother whispered. I pulled out the chair across from them and sat down, expression unreadable. "You wanted to talk." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then my father cleared his throat, trying to regain whatever authority he still thought he had. "We've fallen on hard times." I stayed silent, letting them squirm. My mother leaned in, her voice soft, pleading. "We need help. Your sibling betrayed us. Took everything." She looked at me as if expecting sympathy, as if expecting me to forget what they had done to me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice void of emotion. "They mistook my calmness for weakness." My father straightened. "We wouldn't be here if we weren't desperate. You're our child. We're still family." I almost laughed. Family? Where was this family when I begged them to believe me? Where was this family when they threw me out into the streets with nothing? But I played along. "What do you need?" Relief flashed in their eyes. "Just a little support. Enough to get back on our feet." My mother reached for my hand, her touch foreign, unwelcome. "We never stopped caring about you, sweetheart." I pulled away. The game was far from over. I leaned back in my chair, watching them with quiet amusement. They really thought they could manipulate me, after everything. I let the silence stretch between us, watching their desperation grow with every second. Then, with a small smile, I said, "I don't think you understand who I am anymore." My father frowned. "What do you mean?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out a sleek business card, and slid it across the table. My mother picked it up, squinting at the logo, the title beneath my name. Her fingers trembled. My father snatched the card from her, reading it with wide eyes. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. I wasn't struggling. I wasn't broke. I wasn't the failure they expected me to be. I was successful. Wealthy. Powerful. Everything they had lost, I had gained. Their faces turned pale. My mother let out a shaky breath. You made it?" I gave a slow nod. "Without you. Without your help, your love, or your so-called family." My voice hardened. "I built myself up from nothing. Because you gave me nothing." Regret flickered in their eyes. For the first time, they truly saw me. Not as the child they abandoned, but as the person I had become. A person who no longer needed them. "We didn't know," my mother whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. I let out a dry laugh. You didn't care. My father, always so proud, dropped his gaze. His hands clenched into fists on the table. The weight of his choices finally sinking in. I leaned forward, my voice cold but steady. Do you remember that night? When I begged you to believe me? When I stood at the door, waiting for you to stop me? My mother covered her mouth, guilt flashing across her face. She remembered. You left me to suffer. I let the words cut deep. I was hungry. Alone. Sleeping on benches while you carried on with your perfect little family. I shook my head. And now, here you are. Begging me for help. Tears streamed down my mother's face. My father, always the strong one, looked utterly defeated. They had lost everything. But worse than the money, the house, the reputation, they had lost me. My mother reached for my hand again, but I pulled away. Please, she choked out. Give us another chance. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. No. A sharp breath escaped her lips. My father flinched like I had struck him. This was their karma. I stood up, adjusting my suit jacket. I wanted you to feel what I felt. To know what it's like to beg for something you'll never get. I exhaled slowly. And now you do. They didn't stop me as I walked away. Because deep down, they knew they had lost me forever. As I stepped out of the cafe, the cold air hit my face, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. For years, I had imagined this moment. I had thought about all the ways I could make them suffer, how I could throw their desperation back in their faces. But now that it had happened, I realized I didn't need revenge. I had already won. I had built a life without them. Their absence had made me stronger, not weaker. And now, they were the ones drowning while I stood tall. I glanced back through the window. My parents were still sitting there, stunned, broken, defeated. My mother wiped her tears with shaky hands. My father looked down at the table, as if hoping that if he stayed still enough, time would reverse itself. But there was no going back. They had made their choice years ago. And now, they had to live with it. For a moment, a part of me wanted to forgive them. To believe that people change, that regret could somehow erase the past. But then I remembered who I had been on the night they abandoned me. A scared, heartbroken child. And who had been there for me? No one. Not them. I wasn't that helpless child anymore. I wasn't waiting for their love, their validation, their apology. I didn't need them. I took a deep breath and turned away. With every step I took, I felt lighter. Free. The past no longer had a hold on me. Somewhere behind me, my parents were drowning in regret, realizing they had destroyed the one thing money couldn't replace, their child's love. That was their burden to carry. Mine was to live. To thrive. To move forward. Because at the end of the day, self-worth isn't about who loves you. It's about who you become when no one does.